On today's Locked On Jayhawks, based on what history tells us, is Kansas good enough to win the national title in 2025?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, how's it going? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be discussing the question, is Kansas good enough to win the national title? And we're not just going to, answer that question on, I think so, or no, probably not. We're going to go into what past history tells us, statistic profiles, outliers, all that sort of thing. Is Kansas good enough? And I don't know, maybe the answer will surprise you. We'll find out. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. And thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks, making it your first listen every day and anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page. All right, so we're going to start up based on kind of this more broad filter. And this is one that if you're an everydayer or, if you used to listen when I was on Rock Chalk Sports Talk, that we did during March Madness, kind of filtering down who could win the national title. And we'll re-up that again this year, just to kind of get a base view of, are they good enough to win the title from that perspective. Then we're going to get into more intricate categories about like, okay, well, Kansas would, be the worst team in this category and forcing turnovers or whatever to win a title or something like that. Then we'll kind of get to my takeaways and summarization of everything at the end here. So the first thing that we want to look at for past national champions of college basketball, I should mention the data set, I guess, the sample size that I'm going off of is back to 2001. Why 2001, you might ask? Well, that's just because that's where I can go back and get before tournament NCAA tournament data on KenPom. So that gives us 23 national champions. Obviously, it gives us 24 seasons, but 2020 didn't have a national champion with March Madness not being played, sad face. So anyway, we got 23 champions since 2001 to choose from. Every champion in that span has had a adjusted offensive efficiency rank of 57 or better. The low point was 2014 UConn when they won it on that crazy run with Shabazz Napier. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective, well, Kansas is ranked 40th right now in adjusted offensive efficiency. That's been a number that's been slowly creeping down as the season's gone on. So we'll see where they finish. By the way, these are all pre-tournament numbers again. But right now, Kansas is in that range. So that would be okay. Now, when you look at the defensive side of the ball, every champion in that span has had a top 44 adjusted defensive efficiency. And, there is kind of one weird outlier there with the 44s 2021 Baylor, which was much higher than this, and then they had like a COVID thing go through the team, and then the defense dropped off. But like they were a better defense than that. If you wanted to go off the other number, which would be 37, either way, Kansas would still qualify. They're fifth in adjusted defensive efficiency right now on KenPom. Top 25 overall adjusted EM rank. That basically means you're top 25 coming into the tournament on KenPom. Well, guess what? Kansas is 10th right now on KenPom in overall, so they would qualify there. Top 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. Every champion since then has been a top 7 seed. Well, we're going to see the early bracket reveal on Saturday. I mean, some of the bracketologists I've been looking at, I know Graham Doran, former KU grad who does really good work on the bracketology stuff. He's kind of had them as right on that hump of being between a 3 and a 4 seed right now. So, even if you think, I think they're more of a 3 seed, or if you think they're more of a 4 or a 5 seed, that still is in the top 7 at this point in time. Every national champion has either been with a head coach who has at least made a second round prior under his belt, so he has some tournament experience, or it's his first NCAA tournament. The first NCAA tournament only applies for one guy. It again goes to that 2014 UConn team when Kevin Ollie did it, so that team is just kind of the exception to the rule in a lot of ways. But obviously Bill Self has a previous national title. He has the coaching experience. And then the last one here is they made their conference tournament semis or further. Every team since 01 has won the national championship has at least made the semifinal round. That'll be interesting for KU. That's not something we can judge right now. But as of right now, they're the 5 seed in the Big 12 tournament, which means they'd have to play on Wednesday again, just like they did last year when they got blown out by Cincinnati when they were, on 7 guys that were available. They had a bunch of players like Kevin and Hunter were injured, but You look at it this year, that means, you're going to have to win 2 games to make it to the semis, which sounds crazy from where Kansas is. And then maybe they'll finish the season strong and don't have to worry about that you'll just have to win 1 game. But regardless, that'll be something to watch. So if you're just going off those, which are more the base ones, then Kansas would qualify for being good enough by those monikers to win a national title this year. And that is obviously a good thing. What if we narrow things down a little bit? Because as you heard me talking about, like I mentioned, the 2014 UConn team with Shabazz Napier, but that team is more of an exception to the rule in a lot of ways, by their seed, by their offense rank, by their overall rank, by the head coach experience. All of those make them the ultimate exception to the rule. So what if we take away the exceptions to the rule? Okay, if we take away, we could say that 22 of the 23 last national champions, again, just removing that UConn team, ranked in the top 21 in adjusted offensive efficiency. And that is where you run into an issue here if you're Kansas, because again, you're ranked 40th at this point in time. Right now, they do not have the good enough offense to win the title. And are you going to be able to find a solution for that? I don't know. At this point in time, doesn't feel great, but like, what would that solution look like? Rylan Griffin starts making his threes, right? AJ Storr gives you consistent stuff off the bench. Diggy Coit gives you more of what you saw last game and that we've seen in some other games on a little bit more of a consistent basis, right? Those are kind of the avenues, I think, for that happening, and then maybe more consistent play from the current guys you're kind of looking at. And I don't know. It's just like there's not a lot of offensive firepower on this team that one might be tough to get into. But again, if you want to hold on to the top 57, then you're fine there. And I should mention, too, the last 7 champs have all been top 6 in adjusted offensive efficiency. So that doesn't bode well for Kansas there. Then again, maybe you're sitting there going, you know what? I don't view this team as a national title contender anyway. If they make like an Elite 8, I'll be happy with it, right? And then maybe this is a different discussion. But still, it's Kansas basketball. The goal is always to win a national title, right? Okay, so you look at the defensive side of the ball, 22 of the 23 champions. The only exception to this rule, again, being that Baylor team, were top 37. But again, Kansas qualify there. What's interesting is the last 7 national champions, going back to the offense thing, last 7 national champions have been a better offensive team than they were a defensive team coming into the tournament. And I think there is something to the idea that, like, you still have to be a good enough defense to qualify for this, right? But as long as you're in the range of being a good enough defense, it is easier to ramp up the defense, right? Kansas, you look at their 2022 team, they were in the teens in defensive efficiency coming into the tournament. Actually, they were lower, and I think they finished in the teens. They were 29th. In defensive efficiency coming into the tournament in 2022. They wound up 17th. You can ramp up the defense from being the 30th best defense to ended up the 15th best defense a lot easier than you can, ramping up the 60th best offense and turning it into the 30th best offense. Like, that is offensive talent. That is shot making over the course of the season. So I do think that's interesting, and Kansas certainly would have to buck that trend. 20 of the 23 champions were top 6 in adjusted EM. And in fact, the last 9 champions were top 6 on KenPom coming in to the NCAA tournament. In fact, 6 of the last 7 were top 4. Now, it's not impossible that Kansas could find their way into the top 6. They're a plus 25.81. There's a sizable-ish, to the 6th team, which is Alabama, who's plus 28.96. And with the schedule Alabama plays, they're not going to get dinged for if they lose a lot of these games. So probably not going to happen. But again, if you just want to go off the broader one, then you're okay there. 22 of the 23 champions were top 4 seeds. Again, that's one that Kansas is kind of on the borderline of. And then every team who has won a title since 2001, that was not Connecticut, right? So you have Connecticut winning the title in 2004, 2011, 2014, 2023, 2024. Every school that was not Connecticut in that span who has won a title has had a coach that previously had an Elite 8 or better. And so obviously Bill Self would check that box pretty easily, and some for KU. Then also you get into the conference tournament thing. Again, they all made the conference tournament semis. 14 of the 23 champs did make the conference tournament finals, but I don't know. The interesting part here for me was just this more of a footnote. 4 of the last 5 teams who won the national title that also won their conference tournament were Big East teams. The only one who's the exception there is Kansas. So pretty much it has been over the history here, don't win your conference championship, or win your conference championship if you're in the Big East, or just have 2022 like you were Kansas. I don't know. That's just a weird trend. Just make the conference tournament semifinals. So if you're going on the looser terms, Kansas is a national title contender. If you're going on the tighter terms, by the offense offensive side of the ball, that's kind of the big one that's the Achilles heel right now for KU. Let's get into some more specific ones, though, like 2-point shooting or turnover rate. Where does Kansas stack up to past national champions in some of those areas? Our episode of Locked On Jayhawks today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I mean, we're talking about national title contenders. You can use some of these parameters I'm talking about to figure out who you think can win the title. Maybe you do want to put a future on Kansas, which you can get pretty juicy odds over at FanDuel right now. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and of the Locked On Podcast Network. Continuing on the show, and don't forget to check out some of our recent episodes if you haven't already. KU Colorado recap, and we'll have KU Utah preview coming up on tomorrow's episode. Find Locked On College Basketball or Locked On College Football also. All right, digging into some of the more specific numbers, how KU compares to past national champions. Now, unfortunately, these specific numbers like the effective field goal percentage or the turnover rate offense or getting to the free throw line or whatever, these are numbers that are not available pre-tournament, that you can go back and find them pre-tournament. They're only available post-tournament. So these numbers are going to be a little bit different, where these ones are, you do have to factor in, hey, if you're at least close in this category, right, you do have to factor in that if you win 6 straight games in March, a lot of those numbers are going to go up, right, because you're going to be playing well to win a national title. So this is one where it's less about, can you be, if every national champion's been in the top 180 and you're 185, it's like, okay, that might be good enough because, again, that ride might get you there. But 24 of the past 25 national champions, this is one that I can go back a little bit further. So this one, we're going back to 1999 just because we wanted to put another UConn national championship in there. But no, 24 of the last 25 national champions had an effective field goal percentage by the end of the year in the top 115. You look at Kansas right now, okay, they're ranked 70th. Good enough, 53.4. 24 of the 25 national champions have had a turnover rate offensively in the top 150. Also good there. Kansas is in the top 100 right now. Although that number has been going down a little bit in Big 12 play, but, neither here nor there. Offensive rebound rate, 23 of the 25 were top 140 in offensive rebound rate. So this is one that Kansas started the season slow. They were bad at it last year. They have gotten better as the season's gone on. I think a big part of that was a lot of some of those lineups where you're playing Flory and Hunter, Flory and KJ, where it gives you a little bit more. They're now currently 168th in offensive rebound rate. But the number is up a tick or two in conference play. So that could be a number that, especially if you do go on a run in March, probably would finish in the top 140 if you just keep on the trajectory you're on. So I guess you could say they're okay there. Top 175 in 3-point percentage. Kansas, despite some inconsistencies there, is actually 146th at 34.2%. Now, I will say, because modern basketball is different, if we were to go back, let's see, to 2018, the 2018 Villanova team that, made a lot of threes, certainly. Every team since 2018 has been top 75 nationally in 3-point percentage. So maybe with the way the game is played now, that one becomes even more important, because the 2 years prior to that, you had 148 and 105. So if you're going off that, then Kansas needs to. But also, I think the way that Kansas is played right now, and going back to they need more in offense, it would just take them having like a Malik Newman run from maybe like Rylan Griffin or AJ or one of these guys that like raises that 3-point percentage anyway, for them to kind of get through this point. 2-point percentage, 23 of the 25 champs had top 180 2-point percentages. Kansas is good there. They're top 70 in the country. Free throw percentages were top 190 for 24 of the 25. This is one where Kansas has not shot free throws well, but they do just clear this. They're 187th nationally right now with the free throw percentage just under 72%. That's barely clearing inside there. Then you look at some of the other ones. This one's always interesting. Bench minutes, like having a deep bench is actually not correlated with. In fact, it's the opposite. It is highly correlated that the teams, with the exception of, so 2017 North Carolina, they were top 70 in the country in bench minutes. Every other team that has won a title since Ken Palm has tracked bench minutes, which goes back to 2007, so 16 of the 17, were not in the top 140. It almost behooves you to find that sixer. Like, you need to be deep enough to have a guy or two that can come off the bench and you can trust in case there's foul trouble, or just if somebody's in a lull in the starting lineup. That's absolutely true. You need controlled depth, right? You need a good 6th and 7th guy, maybe a good 8th guy, right? But you almost don't want to have good 9th and 10th. Like, you want your rotation to be locked. You want your rotation to be set. Kansas right now in bench minutes is 222nd in the country, so I guess they would qualify there. Experience 14 to the 17 were top 130. Kansas is number 1. We haven't really seen that pay off so far this year, though, unfortunately. Height rating 15 to the 17 were top 145. Kansas qualifies there, top 75. So really, when going through the offense, even though the overall offensive rating isn't good enough, a lot of the individual statistics, they're right there or okay in, actually, for Kansas. What about on the defense side of the ball, which has been KU's bread and butter to this point? 24 of the 25 champs, top 75 in effective field goal percentage defense. Kansas is 6th in the country there. This one's interesting, though. 24 of the 25 were had defenses that prevented teams from getting to the free throw line at a top 170 rate. What was interesting is the offensive side didn't really correlate with much, which is good for Kansas because they've been really bad at getting to the free throw line, but that didn't correlate as much as the defensive side did. And Kansas is in the top 70 in free throw attempt per field goal attempt, right? All 25 champs since 1999 had a 3-point defense ranking in the top 160. Well, Kansas is actually 10th in the country right now, which feels very weird to say when you consider, like, when you think of what typically, these Bill Self teams are, when they have issues, or like teams just going bonkers from 3, you think of like the K-State game, right? But they do qualify there. 2-point defense, 23 of the 25 champs, top 115. Kansas is 16th. Only giving up 45% on 2-point defense. And then block rate, 23 of the 25 were top 140 nationally. Kansas is top 35. The last one here, we've gone through this whole way being like, okay, the overall offensive ranking needs to get better for Kansas to apply for one of these parameters, but a lot of these individual numbers are actually okay for Kansas. And we finally stumbled upon one that is not the case. 24 of the last 25 national champions had a top 215 steal rate defensively. That's not like an overwhelming number necessarily. Kansas is outside of that. They're 236th, and their turnover rate defense ranks just 271st. And you just played Colorado, a team who was the worst turnover offense team in the Big 12, and they had their best turnover offense game of the season against you. So this is a number that's dropping for Kansas as well. Now, the one exception to the rule was the 2004 Connecticut squad, which, again, Connecticut just always ends up being the exceptions to the rule here. They were 279th, so I guess you're a little bit better than them, but I don't know. Does Hunter Dickinson have an Emeka Okafor, run in him where he can dominate on both ends of the ball for Kansas? Who knows? So that's kind of interesting. But I will say, going through all this, you might be a little bit surprised. I certainly was surprised going through all this, how many of these boxes Kansas actually did check. That, the big one with the offensive rating being where it is not going to be good enough. That is going to have to get better, point blank, for Kansas to go on a run in March and to have success in March. But I do think there's maybe a little bit more working for Kansas than you might think from perception. You might think from the record. You might think from some of the losses that they have suffered. So maybe this is a little bit encouraging for you. Now, what are the takeaways? How does Kansas get better on that offensive side of the ball? Let's discuss that next with Locked On Jayhawks. All right, thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks, and thank you to everydayers catching all of our episodes. Again, we'll have a Kansas-Utah preview on Friday's episode to get you ready for things. It's a weekend ahead where Kansas is going to play at Utah. We might get a bonus episode out for you Saturday if we can about whatever seed, unless they're left out, I guess, which that would be newsworthy as well. Kansas is in that, I guess, mock release or early release, whatever you want to call it, from the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, and where they would currently be at this point in time. So Kansas, again, going through some of these numbers, actually stacks up okay. But the big one I keep coming back to is that, yes, every national champion since 2001 has had a top 57 offense on KenPom, and they are inside that. But again, if you take out that one exception to the rule, that one UConn team that, even though over the course of the season they weren't an overwhelming offense, in the tournament, they were obviously a lot better. And the reason I think you would point to that is say, Oh, they had really good guard play. Guards who could score the basketball, right? You think about Shabazz Napier, who ended up being a first-round pick. You think about DeAndre Daniels, who I think he was like an early second-round pick. I guess former KU recruit, former, I don't know, KU target, DeAndre Daniels, whatever you want to call. And then I'm trying to Ryan Boatwright. That was the other guy. Like, they had guys who could get buckets from the guard position. I don't know that Kansas, like Zeke Mayo could do that. I guess if Diggy Coit gets hot, that would be the other avenue for that happening, right? Rylan Griffin getting hot. But that's kind of what I consistently come back to. What ways can Kansas maximize the offense? I think number one, like from this point forward, I think Rylan Griffin needs to be a double-digit point per game scorer for you. I think he needs to be averaging 10, 12 points per game the rest of the way for you to improve that offense, and doing so on high 30s from three, right? If he shoots 40, even better. He's been in a slump the last 3 games. What are you going to do, though? Like, if you're like, you don't really have many other options who can be as lethal of a three-point shooter as Rylan Griffin when he is going. I think you just have to ride with it and deal with the lows and hope that there's a peak, that there's because here's the other thing. It's not like this is like the Nick Timberlake thing where it's just like all year it was inconsistent and not very good. It's like Rylan Griffin was shooting well from three before these last 3 games when he has oddly been starting. So I don't know but he's had other games he started before this stretch where he was doing okay. So I think you just assume the shooting's going to get better. Can he get like white hot? What if he has a Malik? And this is a bad thing to bank on, because the Malik Newman March thing is not something you can count on every year. It's usually like a once in a generation type of thing, or a once in a handful of years, or once in a 10-year type of thing, that you can't count on that sort of thing happening all the time. But that is maybe a little bit of the hope that he can be at least like a 2.0 version of that, right? Where he can shoot 45% from three in the month of March and just get hot for a while. The other one, I think you need at least one of Diggy Coit or AJ Storr to be consistently getting you a point, right? You can't have, okay, Diggy Coit gives you 8 points this game, and then the next 2 games he gave you 2 combined. Or like AJ Storr gave you 10 points this game, the next 2 games he gave you 4 points combined. You need a consistent score from one of those 2 guys, and maybe it does alternate between the 2, and I guess that could possibly be okay. The other one is that Flory consistently finds what makes him great. When Flory is I think when every player on KU is operating at the best version of themselves, there's nothing that looks like Flory Badunga on this Kansas team. And I think when he's operating at the best version of himself, he's the best player on the team. Unfortunately, he's a freshman, and you're not always going to operate at the best. I mean, even older players aren't going to operate at the best version of themselves all the time, right? There's so many things that go into it, and that's part of what makes sports what they are, because it's unpredictable, and these are humans, and we're not robots, and you don't get the same consistency. It's not a video game where you're always an 87 every single day. Some days you're a 78, other days you're a 90, right? But can Flory play close to that ceiling as much as possible? That would be the other one. And then I think the last one that I want to look into with like the offensive end of the court, like what can you figure out with KJ Adams? Like, can you get more 5 assist games from KJ Adams? That would certainly help. And then I guess I said the last one, so I lied, I guess. But DeJuan Harris, can he be back to, closer to like 40% three-point shooter? He's been closer to a 30% three-point shooter this year. If he gets up to 40%, right, that you combine that with a consistent bench score and Rylan Griffin to where you'd be a much better three-point shooting team, and now teams have to respect all this stuff a little bit more. I think it opens it up more for Hunter and Flory and KJ and stuff. Those would be the avenues that I would be looking at to be like, okay, this team can be better on the offensive end of the ball. The last one would be actually a defensive one that would help the offense. It goes back to that turnover stuff, right? When you look at how bad Kansas is at steal rate and turnover rate, there's no excuse to be as bad as they are with the personnel. I'm not saying this team should be Houston or Iowa State in terms of forcing turnovers. I'm not even saying they should maybe even be a top 100 team. But instead of being in the mid 200s, can you be top 150? Can you be 170th where you're like slightly above average? And when you look at it, it's like DeJuan Harris is pretty good at forcing steals, right? That's a good start to things. KJ Adams has been a really good defender. He just had a couple steals in the Colorado game, maybe it was 3. Can you get some there? Hunter Dickinson, even though he has certain deficiencies on the defensive end, has typically been pretty aware when like a pass is coming in that he has the ability to steal. So like he'll end up with, averaging a steal per game in some of his seasons, right? So like there's an opportunity there. You look at it, if you're Shaquille Moore, like that should be your calling card. Some of the early games when he was starting, that was his calling card. He was so good at getting steals. That's kind of gone away. Can you get back to that, right? I don't know that it's ever really going to be the calling card for like Storr and Griffin and stuff, but that's not really what you're asking them to do. And then, can Flory do it? We've seen Flory be able to poke the balls free. He does more with like the blocking than getting the steals maybe, but Can you get a little bit more from like Zeke Mayo? Can you get a little bit more from Rylan Griffin? Can you get a little bit more from some of these guys? Get a little bit more steals that allow you to get in transition and throw more of those lobs to KJ Adams or Flory Badunga and make yourself a more efficient offense just because you're going to get higher efficiency plays out in transition. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Back at you Friday with a KU Utah preview. See you then.